Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session, parallel session 3B, Roads and Transport Infrastructure. If you've just discovered you're in the wrong session, please don't leave, because there aren't very many of us as it is. My name is Tess Newton-Cain. I'll be chairing this session. And I find myself surprisingly excited about this session. I think we're going to hear some very interesting and important things about roads and infrastructure, roads and transport infrastructure, but which are sort of cross-cutting across a number of countries in the region. In a recently published business review that came out in Vanuatu, my country, lots of talk about a huge amount of investment in this area. I think we're going to hear lots of things around the politics of development, issues around aid versus debt, the importance of maintenance, all of these things that I know are going to be very important. And we have for you a panel of people who are eminently qualified to discuss these issues. This is a bit of a multi-country, multimedia session, so we'll be starting with a video presentation that's been prepared by Mr. Naoyuki Yoshino, who is the current Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute, and he also holds a number of key advisory positions in relation to financing in Japan and throughout the region. We'll then move on to a multi-authored presentation, but in person will be delivered by Christopher Edmonds, who's the Senior Economist for the Asian Development Bank based in Manila, but who has particular oversight for the bank's investments in the Pacific, so it's great to have him here with us. And then we'll move on to a session by Matthew Dornan, who is the Deputy Director of the Development Policy Centre at ANU. And Matthew obviously brings a wealth of expertise and experience in this area, and he's going to be talking about some current work he's doing in Papua New Guinea. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Setareki Macanawai, who's sitting here to my left, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Pacific Disability Forum, which is obviously a peak body looking at issues relating to people living with disabilities in our region. So that's the order in which they'll speak, and I've managed to put faces to most of the names. And we're going to commence with the video presentation. Everybody will have 15 minutes, as is standard. I don't quite know, I'm hoping that this video presentation has been edited to be 15 minutes long. And we'll save all the questions and discussion till the end. Okay, so now I have to... We're going to move on to our second presentation. Christopher, I think, has his co-authors listening in on Skype, and he will be here in person. And he's taken over the technology. So, Christopher, when you're ready, please begin.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I feel very pressed for time, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this research that ADBI is working on with the university. I won't even try to pronounce the name, but an excellent university in Amsterdam. And so I'm here representing the team that is on that slide. And we also, this is building very much on the work of John Gibson that he had done earlier. So he's actually been sort of played an extended reviewer role on this research, so we thank him for that. I guess, although this is a study of PNG, I think the implications and the methods are actually much more applicable. So institutions, so I'll look at the PNG case. So here, we start out in the countryside. And throughout the Pacific, we know access and people's ability to get to the cities where there's commercial enterprise and lots of opportunity is a big challenge, and particularly in the PNG highlands. And ADB works with a lot of Pacific governments. It's a major portion of our portfolio is to develop the infrastructure to improve the connectivity and enable Pacific Islanders around the region to really benefit from the opportunities that the global economy creates, but you have to get the access costs down. So we're making these huge investments with the government, but do we really know what the impact is of these things? Dean Yoshino's presentation indicated a number of methods to look at tax revenues essentially as an ex post measure of that. This is a different method that are developing much more in line with impact evaluation methodology, which in general, if you know the literature at all, is very hard to apply for infrastructure for various reasons. But, we started this study to try to basically use secondary data and to construct by overlapping information on how roads have changed and making use of the existing household income and expenditure surveys of countries. We construct a cross-sectional time series to look at the impact of roads. Because the magnitude of investments in roads is so large, you can actually identify. So there'll be some households in the household income expenditure surveys that are in areas where roads have been improved, and other households that are not. And by comparing those two groups of households, you can get a measure of the impact of roads. So I'll talk quickly about some general issues with assessing road impact, and then talk about these two sources of data. And the team has done amazing work in Amsterdam in terms of constructing this database, and so some really good achievements there. And we think that, well, I'll save my conclusion for the conclusion. I'll review quickly some of the descriptive statistics from the household income and expenditure surveys, and then look at some of the estimation results. So in terms of the issues with assessing impact, you have limited data availability, and that's been a huge one. Actually, an earlier ADB effort that I was working on in 2011 and 2012, we actually tried to go out and collect survey data, and that did not work out well. Survey data collection in PNG is extremely difficult to do. There's a high level of limited access to certain areas based on existing ethnic divisions in the country. So you basically would need enumeration teams for each village, and then you get very different data across teams. So doing original survey work is very hard. So we were looking for a way to take advantage of the existing data to do an evaluation of roads. So that's the big picture. But the problem with roads is they're constructed in areas with economic potential, and there's a positive correlation between roads and because of that. Just because you find that wealthier, where roads are built, you get wealthier areas. There's an endogeneity there. There's characteristics of the areas where people chose to build the road that would have, even in the absence of the road, probably accounted for better economic performance of those areas. So you need to use estimation approaches to address that problem. So we find exogenous factors that affected road construction and maintenance, basically what economists call an instrumental variables technique. And we focus on changes per region to correct for time invariant regional factors. And then finally, we exploit village variation in road access. In other words, households in a given village live different distances from the road. So you take advantage of that difference in trying to gauge the effect of improved access on economic behavior and welfare. So I'm going to go very quickly through a lot of these slides. I could really probably use an hour for the presentation. I have 15 minutes. So the presentation will be uploaded to the Development Policy Center website, and you can read it, and the report should be out soon. But basically there was a household income and expenditure survey done in 1996, and then a follow-up survey in 2000. Well, it's not a follow-up survey, but another round. So these two surveys didn't track the same households, but they were taking similar snapshots and actually had similar sample frames. Okay, so road access variables are not consistent. The 1996 survey included travel time to the nearest road, while the later survey didn't capture that variable, unfortunately. So the road access data from the household survey is not comparable. So the team had to spend a great deal of time trying to construct that from knowing where the households are and then knowing where the roads had changed. So that's essentially what I'll talk about next. Sorry. Somehow okay, back right. I don't know how that happened. So the data in 2000 was combined from two sources: the road asset management data set, which was provided by some Australian national university working with the Department of Works in PNG. So they basically had done a census of roads in 2000 and their state where they were. So it contains information on surface type and condition. DOW, the Department of Works in PNG, had another data set. And that data set was mapped, just so and so then using the GIS, that data was all put into a GIS, and that you can sort of see what the state of the P&G road system was according to that data set in 2000. And then a lot of effort was to sort of reconcile the two sources of data. So you had the data from 2000 and 2009, and they were trying to figure out what was going on, and there were missing stretches. Basically, impact estimates provide. So it was assumed that any roads that were identified in 2009 that weren't there in 2000, based on information received in the field, we were told that very unlikely that any new roads had actually been constructed during that period. So that was assumed that the road quality did not change over time. And then, so the impacts provide a lower bound estimate of the true impact. And then you can just sort of see what the two road data sets showed in terms of the total length of the road and the condition of the road across those two time periods. And have to go pretty quickly. And then the key effort is with help of the National Statistical Office in P&G, the team was able to geo-reference all the households that had responded to the Household Income and Expenditure Survey. You can see where this is going. So now we know where the households are in the two heights. We know where the roads have changed or reported improved condition. And now all we have to do is put those two together and run some estimates. So this is sort of the location of households sampled in 2009, an example of that. So then looking quickly at some of the descriptive statistics and sort of what the HICE was showing about how households were doing. So the age of the head of household. This is just showing what the average household characteristics were across those two periods. And you can see the variables that are highlighted in green, you actually see a marked improvement over the time. And the one very regrettable thing that we saw happening in P&G, according to the HICE, was that the poverty, the headcount poverty index actually rose between these 2 years. And there's separate papers to explain why that was the case. A lot of it had to do with rising costs of living, and as well as probably rural to urban migration, with urban migration being associated with higher poverty. But it's going to be very hard to explain changes where there wasn't, where variables were stable over time. But for the ones that changed over time, we have some lever to get at the thing. Just so you can see that. And these are the accessibility variables across the two periods. So again, probably not time to dwell on them, but so we were measuring how that changed according to the two household income and expenditure surveys. Going into the analysis very quickly, here's our estimation model. For those of you who are economists, it should be a familiar form. It's a cross-sectional time series data and looking at village level effects. And the key variables that we're interested in is the household's distance to the nearest road and the condition of the road leading to the nearest town. So in terms of the estimates, we started by replicating the Gibson and Roselle results using the later survey data. So Gibson and Roselle was done on the 1996 data, and then adding the data from the GIS on the road asset management system. And what we found based on those estimates is a 1% increase in the distance to the nearest road was associated with lower consumption, lower non-food consumption, lower probability of having a good roof on the home, and an increase in the likelihood of working as purely a subsistence farm household. So all the stuff the signs were very consistent with what Gibson and Roselle had found in their 1996, the paper based on the 1996 data, and confirmed with what we'd expect to happen. Improved access improves consumption, improves non-food consumption, improves the likelihood that you have a good house, improves the likelihood that you might get an off-farm job. Okay. So then we wanted to look at the effects of changes in travel time to the nearest town. So we regressed household welfare on the condition of the road leading to the nearest town. So we're using the variation both between the two surveys, since road condition did vary over time. Okay, and the dependent variables are sort of the state of the road. We don't have panel data, so it's a cross-sectional time series data, so we have to use these estimation strategies developed by some famous econometricians, Mundlock and Chamberlain. So that's there for those of you who can appreciate it. I'm not going to take time to go through that. Some of the estimation results, these are the cross-sectional results, and you can see that the log of distance to the nearest road had the effects. Even when we account for village and district fixed effects, we get a significant distance. So where the distance is further, you have a decrease in the non-food expenditure per adult in the household, okay, and fairly good R-squareds. And then looking at the effects that look at the two, so that was the table I just showed you was looking at the cross-sectional results from the 2009 survey data, using the cross-sectional time series data, and then looking at the places where the road status changed between 1996 and 2009. We can measure the impact of that on these different welfare indicators indicated there: good roof, consumption, non-food consumption, owning animals, child enrollment in education. And you can see that there are some positive and expected signs of the variables. Okay. So now we finally arrived in Port Moresby, the land of opportunity. And in terms of the conclusions of the paper, so I'm going to be just on time. I'm talking quickly. So the cross-sectional analysis confirms the earlier analysis. Higher distance to road was associated with lower welfare. ADB is very happy to hear this. I think the governments that have chosen to invest in this area will be happy to hear this. In other words, the rhetoric you often hear, that improving road access will improve household welfare. Well, this was a fairly rigorous study, and it's finding that. It's taking a lot of effort to control for the endogeneity in the decision about where to locate road, and it's still finding a significant impact. Patchy road indicate that increase in sealed roads. There was an increase in sealed roads, but also a deterioration in gravel roads. And impact estimates indicate that road improvements contributed to areas where welfare improved between 1996 and 2009, but there's no evidence that the small increase in poverty was in any way associated with changes in road access. More interestingly, I think for this audience is sort of the methodology that was developed, I think is a very promising one in terms of ways of making use of the existing household income and expenditure data and existing databases on road improvement. So this is something that I think could be applied in a number of Pacific countries. So the countries are all collecting these HICE surveys. We're supposed to do it every 3 to 5 years. Pacific, they probably don't have the resources to do it that often. But there's a number of Pacific countries where we have numbers of rounds of HICE that we can now use. Using a model that's akin to a village fixed effects estimator, you can look at road impacts. And you can probably use this for other infrastructure as well, as long as you are tracking changes in the electricity grid, trying to think what water access, all these things. They could all be estimated using this method. Because the data that's hardest to get is the data on the welfare indicators. That's the really laborious and tough stuff to get. So I think that's exciting. So this type of data is available in many countries, and it lends itself well to replication. So my big question, and as chair of ADB's Interdepartmental Committee on Impact Evaluation, I'd ask the question, is this methodology a potential breakthrough in how to evaluate the impact of infrastructure? And I'd say it's promising, but look forward to the final paper. I think the data was particularly challenging in the PNG, probably more challenging than it may be in some other countries. So I'll end my presentation there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Christopher, and thank you for keeping to time. I'm going to move so that Matthew can sit here. Next we'll be hearing from Matthew Dornan about road management in Papua New Guinea.
my presentation complements Christopher's very nicely, so that's a good thing. A great presentation, Christopher, really interesting work. So good morning, everyone. So Christopher was talking about the economic and social benefits of road access. In my presentation, I'm going to take those impacts as given, and instead I want to focus on the reasons why maintenance of roads is so often inadequate, looking specifically at the impact of decentralization in Papua New Guinea. So this is my presentation, but many of the findings I'm going to present come from a research project that is still underway. So they are preliminary findings, and that research is being conducted jointly by the Development Policy Centre at ANU, where I am based, together with the National Research Institute in PNG. And I've listed the three other people that are involved in that research. They include Ronald Sorfair and Carmen Voigt-Graf, both from NRI, and Rowan Fox, who is throughout the research has been both with ANU and with the University of Papua New Guinea. This research really builds on earlier work I've done. I won't speak about the proof report on infrastructure maintenance in the interest of time, but I do just want to briefly mention previous work that I've done looking at management of the road network in PNG at the national level. And this is a really important distinction. So Christopher mentioned provincial roads in his presentation. So in PNG there are two types of roads. There are national roads. Those are roads that the Papua New Guinea government has gazetted as being falling under its responsibility, and the national government actually has responsibility for the management and ongoing maintenance of those roads. Anything that is not gazetted is a non-national road. And that falls to the subnational levels of government. So this is why decentralisation is really important in explaining the state of the road network in PNG. And around, PNG has around 30,000 kilometres of road. It's the longest network in the region by far. 9,000 kilometres is gazetted as national roads. And these tend to be the more important roads, the ones that link major towns and provinces. The others are all non-national roads. They're not major arteries, but they are important in linking people in rural areas to markets and in facilitating their access to health and education services. And there's been very limited research done on non-national roads in the past. Most donor studies have looked primarily at the national road network, so this is why it was really good to see the work that Christopher presented now that was more focused on provincial roads. Getting data on these roads is really difficult, and you saw the quite elaborate exercise that Christopher went through to get data on non-national roads. I have questions for him, but I might leave them for later on the quality of some of that data. We looked at 5 provinces and used them as case studies, and we chose those provinces so that they'd be broadly representative of provinces across PNG. I've already said that 2/3 of the road network in PNG are non-national roads. The data is pretty poor on those roads, so the Department of Works Road Asset Management System is primarily focused on the national road network, not on the non-national roads. And as Christopher can probably see what my questions are going to relate to. In terms of the provincial and the district level governments, very few keep any records of the roads under their responsibility. So just 6 provinces have databases on their road network, and no others do. We do know that the non-national roads are in a dismal state. They're in much worse condition than the national road network, and that's reflected in this statement from the 2013 budget, which is quite striking in its language. I won't read through it though. Now I'm going to argue that to understand the reason for the state of the non-national road network, it's necessary to look at PNG's histories with decentralisation. So PNG was highly centralised at independence, and that's because of the legacy of the colonial period of government. In 1977, it sought to decentralise service provision. and this is really in a bid to ensure that the bulk of Papua New Guineans who live in rural areas received basic services. That effort is generally considered to have failed. The responsibilities of the provincial governments were never outlined clearly, and the majority of revenue continued to flow to the national government. The 1995 reforms, they were more significant. They transferred responsibility for a wide range of service provision to provincial and below them to local level governments. And importantly for our study, the determination of service delivery responsibilities assigned responsibility for management of non-national roads to the provincial level of government. However, adequate funding was never provided to the provincial level of government. And the effect of this was that service delivery was undermined, and that includes road management. So the National Economic and Fiscal Commission's Cost of Services study, it demonstrated this lack of funding quite clearly. And in response, government put in place the reform of intergovernmental financing arrangements, RICFA. And it determines the funding that national governments provide to provincial governments, and it bases that level of funding on the cost of service delivery in each province, as well as the revenue raising capability of provincial governments. The RICFA aims to ensure that all Papua New Guineans receive a basic level of services, and it does this by increasing the level of funds, which are called function grants, that were provided to those provincial governments. It's a bit echoey, isn't it?
I think the other mic is on.
That would explain it. Thanks. So the RICFA has seen increased funding provided to provincial governments. Function grants have increased from 140 million in 2009 to just under 600 million kina in 2016. However, for various reasons, implementation has been lacking. There remains very poor reporting on the funds that are spent. Transfers of funding from the central government generally often made only very late in the fiscal year. Capacity at that subnational level of government remains quite poor, although there is quite a significant variation between the different provinces, and that's something that we identified in our study. And all of this is reflected in low levels of expenditure relative to the cost of services estimates. And you can see that for infrastructure maintenance here, these figures are from the National Economic and Fiscal Commission, and you can see that spending in the different years is far below what NEFC estimates is required just to maintain the existing road network. But not just road network, this also includes airstrips and walls and so forth. A more recent development is the very significant increases in constituency development funds, which are called Service Improvement Program funds. So these are funds that are provided to members of Parliament to spend in their electorate. And this is a development that has really taken place under the O'Neill government. These increases dwarf the earlier increases in the function grants that I was talking about that go to provincial administrations. And the key difference between them is that the function grants are effectively channeled through the provincial government structures. These constituency development funds are basically controlled by the members of Parliament themselves. The other difference is that the function grants for recurrent expenditure, so for road maintenance, these tend to be for capital expenditure, although the line is often fairly blurry. The importance of those service improvement funds is really evident when you drill down into the budget data at the provincial and district government level. So here you see total funding for Gulf Province, which is one of the least developed provinces in PNG. And you see that the service improvement funds, they include DSIP, PSIP and LLGSIP, those really comprise the bulk of revenue that's been received in the province, and those are funds controlled by politicians. The function grants are what the provincial administration actually receives, and it channels some of that funding down to the district government level, but it's really very small in comparison to those constituency development funds. So from the perspective of road management, there are a number of problems with this arrangement, and they were made very clear to us in our interviews. The first is a lack of ownership of the road network, and this stems from lack of clarity regarding which level of government is actually responsible for the ongoing management and maintenance of those roads. So if we take that determination of service delivery responsibility, which was issued years ago by the national government, then it should be the provincial level of government that's responsible. But the funding that they're provided to actually do this work is totally inadequate. And as I mentioned, the bulk of funds from the national government are actually flowing directly to members of parliament, not to the provincial government structures. On the ground, it was quite striking. Nobody even knows about this determination of service delivery responsibility document, even though that's the key document outlining the responsibility of the provincial governments and the local level governments. So not even heads of provincial government knew that this document existed. So there's no list of what road belongs to which level of government. People talk about provincial roads, district roads, access roads, which are for the local level government, but they're really just informal arrangements, and there is often conflict regarding what one stretch of road is. So a provincial government will say, well, we're not working on that because that's the district's responsibility. The district will say, actually, that's a provincial government responsibility, so we're not going to do any work on that. So really what we see is blame shifting. In theory, this could be solved if the different levels of government worked together, and that is what is supposed to happen. The local level government plans and budgets are supposed to feed into those of the district into those of the province. But that doesn't happen on the ground, and in fact, political rivalries often mean that the different levels of government actively seek to undermine the activities of the other. They don't share any information. The provincial governments don't know what the district level governments are actually doing, what funds they're spending. And this really undermines effective road management. And it's complicated further by the fact that the Department of Works at the national level, it's supposed to only work on national level roads, but often through the development budget, it's provided with funds to work on non-national roads, and the level of communication with the provinces, with the districts, is very variable. Another problem, I've already alluded to this, is the split between the recurrent and the development expenditure. So it's really not determined on the basis of need. There's no coordination regarding those levels of recurrent and development expenditure. They're basically, the capital expenditure is effectively just set by political leaders in Port Moresby and Waigani. So in the case of the Service Improvement Program funds, each district is provided with a set allocation, and that's irrespective of its population, of its remoteness, of the cost of actually providing those services or maintaining those roads. So the RIGFA process, which is actually a very good framework for allocating funds, that's just been totally sidelined in the provision of this capital expenditure, which has really just been driven by political objectives. The quality of the spending under those service improvement programs is variable, to say the least. Expenditure is highly politicised. So Colin Wiltshire, a colleague from ANU, he's shown that DSIP funds are often allocated on the basis of voting patterns, meaning that communities that don't vote for a candidate miss out on those funds. Another issue is a mismatch between the funding allocation and the human resource available. So the district development authorities are being provided with significant fundings through DSIP, but they really lack the human resources to spend that money effectively. The provincial governments, on the other hand, they generally have better capacity, but they're just not being allocated funding. So just to provide an example, many of the districts that we spoke to were using those DSIP funds to purchase equipment to manage roads or to maintain roads, things like bulldozers, graders and so forth. The thing is that the provincial governments already have this equipment. So what we're seeing is 3 sets of equipment, often in the same town. So the districts have their equipment there in the town, the provincial governments have their equipment in town, and the Department of Works has its equipment in town. And there's just no coordination between these, they don't share resources. In the case of those districts, the maintenance of that equipment is also questionable. So there were cases where this equipment, which is very expensive, had been abandoned by the side of the road because it had suffered mechanical problems. All the DSIP funds had been spent, so there wasn't money to actually repair that equipment. So just quickly to conclude, the increases in those funds, in those service improvement funds, effectively constituency development funds, along with the development of those district development authorities, which are charged with expenditure of the bulk of those funds, they're really the signature policies of the O'Neill government. And what I've done in this presentation is outline some of the problems with those funds and how they relate to road management. I should quickly mention there are some positive developments in train. So from next year, DSIP funds must be reported to provincial governments by law, and that's in a bid to improve coordination, so that is a positive development. The government's also looking at updating that determination of service delivery functions, and therefore would specify responsibilities for the provincial government, district level government, and the local level government. That's all great. Implementation will be very difficult, and it will be very highly politicised, allocating different roads to different levels of government. None of those reforms, though, address the principal problem, which is that the bulk of funding in PNG at that subnational government level is effectively being channeled outside of civil service structures. And the effect of that is to undermine the capacity of the state and also the quality of expenditure. My talk has just been on PNG, but I think the overall findings should be of interest to other Pacific Island countries that are considering embarking on decentralisation. So Solomon Islands at the moment is looking very seriously at quite considerable decentralisation of service delivery responsibilities to the provincial government level. I understand that Timor-Leste is also looking into this. So I think there are real lessons that can be learned from PNG's very mixed experience with decentralisation. Thanks.
Okay, so our final presentation this morning will be by Mr. Setareki Macanawai, who is, as I said, the CEO of the Pacific Disability Forum. So we just need to organise the seating to make sure that, first of all, he has a microphone.
Remain here?
Yes, you stay where you are. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you. Yes?
No, it's not. No, it's not. Yeah. Most of the months don't seem to be working.
Organise it.
Seems to be one mic working.
It's working now.
It's okay now? Yeah.
No, I think it's because I moved that one. Oh,
No, it's much better.
Okay now? Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's much better.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, my gratitude, sincere gratitude to the organizers of the conference for including this session, presentation as part of this session, and also for the Pacific Regional Infrastructure Facility PRIF office in Sydney for ensuring that we are actually present here. My third appreciation, I noted in the draft program that this session was actually scheduled for this afternoon at 3 around NC. But I'm really, really grateful that this was moved out of that, because disability is not just about health. It's more than that. It's also about infrastructure, transportation. It's about everything. So I really also want to thank, although it fits here better than in the last session. Maybe the secretary will do the slide 2 maybe. Just in case you're wondering, I'm blind, as you probably might have known, and I use a computer with a speech software. My task this morning, in this 10 minutes or so, is to present this research study report. If you don't have a copy already, I'll ask my colleagues to distribute them. And this is a topic, improving people with disability accessibility in transport infrastructure in the Pacific Islands. I think in the program it says PWD. That's not Public Works Department. That's persons with disabilities. And focusing on the access in the few countries that are targeted. Next slide, please. Slide 3. This report, this research, this study, was developed as part of our efforts to support the project partners, PRIF, and PRIF, as we know, a conglomerate of funding and development partners, both ADBI and the World Bank, as well as DFAT, New Zealand Aid or MFAT now, and EU, as well as JICA. It was actually also initiated by the World Bank through the PRIF Transport Sector Working Group. And two main audiences, groups were targeted in this study. The first one, policy and decision makers, to better inform about the general issues of improving accessibility to persons with disabilities in our community. And the second one is about targeting project managers, planners, engineers, and progress to understand the technical issues related to design and construction of what is to be an accessible infrastructure like roads. Next slide, please. This research study included the background on the legal policy framework by PRIF agencies, finding out how well these PRIF partners, PRIF organizations, in our policies and legislation framework are including accessibility features. And also the audit of accessibility features in the there were 11 projects that were being looked at in Kiribati. That were funded by under PRIF in Kiribati, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Tuvalu. Just to point out here that two researchers that did this study and helped produce this report are actually two persons with disabilities themselves. They use a wheelchair from Singapore. And a consultation with a different range of stakeholders, including project partners, of course, persons with disabilities as users. That was critical that the users themselves were involved as researchers and also as key informants in the study. And of course, the preparation of these reports and other social papers, including this presentation. Next slide, please. Just noting one key lesson. I think it's sort of sharing this one key lesson of the study. I'm sure there are more when you read the actual report that you have a copy of. There are more, but this one is very interesting. The addressing deficits in roads, aviation, and maritime transportation requires a combination of these three elements, or the three E's. It's engineering, education, and enforcement. And engineering, it's largely to do with about accessibility standards, making sure that within this sector that we know what are the accessibility standards and updating them regularly. There's guidelines and ensure that they are incorporated into relevant policies, regulations. When we talk about infrastructure projects, it'd be interesting to hear what was shared already this morning. How accessible were they? Did they take on board accessibility features? Next slide, please. The second E is on education. Of course, this is related to the training required for those who are implementers. Okay, the implementers, those are implementing this infrastructure development work, as well as disabled people's organizations, and development partners to understand why do we do this, why is it important. Yesterday during the plenary, we were hearing a bit about leaving no one behind. We heard the word inclusivity. So ensuring that when we target infrastructure development, that we are also inclusive, leaving no one behind. So part of this education, the key lessons learned is around that. And it's not just only why, but also how. Why there is a need for standards, and certainly how they should be implemented. And the last E of the 3 E's is enforcement. It requires the commitment by governments to ensure that appropriate legislations are regulations that are also developed, that are in place, they are monitored, they are updated, and it's clear who is responsible for this enforcement of these standards. But some standards are here. I know that in Fiji there is a building code standard, but how much of that building code continues to be violated because of lack of enforcement and monitoring. And then also assessment and audits are also conducted when undertaking new infrastructure development. Next slide, please. The recommendations that came out of the report. The first one is around the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities by Pacific Island countries. I'm pleased to report here that out of the 14 Pacific Island countries outside Australia and New Zealand, out of the 14, 13 have either ratified or signed this convention. And Article 9 on accessibility is a key feature of related to this topic. The second recommendation, that Pacific Island countries and through their governments develop it, implement basic accessibility code and work towards a better free accessibility, including seamless connectivity. The important point of making sure that the connectivity are there for everyone. It's interesting, one of the points that was noted in the report, how street lights were placed in the middle of footpaths and trees, and what probably to be decorative in nature end up to be a hassle for persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. Disabled people's organizations to take a lead, take the lead, I guess, in addressing and fighting stigma, by organizing awareness campaigns around persons with disabilities, working with the authority to provide understanding and application of the accessibility code. As the case in point I mentioned earlier about Fiji, there is accessibility code, how much of that is known and then implemented and enforced as well as monitored. What was also noted in the report, the person with disabilities, because of lack of accessibility, are kept at home, becoming unproductive members of the community. Next slide. Ensure that PIF agencies ensure that all new infrastructure are designed and built to be accessible and then in compliance with local domestic laws, regulations. And the last recommendations to Pacific Disability Forum, the organization I work for, and Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, to consider establishing a task force in this country to look to the planning, implementation, and maintenance of accessible infrastructure towards a barrier-free environment and associated capacity requirements. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the report comprises an assessment of the current situation in the countries that were targeted, technical guidelines, and screening tools for assessment and auditing purposes, and accessible features in transport, as well as infrastructure, and of course recommendations and other support materials that may be required to do this work in the region. It is of course designed for policymakers, project managers, planners, engineers and contractors who need to understand the issue related to the design integrated accessible infrastructure for persons with disabilities. That ends my presentation, and it is the greatest pleasure on my part as a project partner along with PRIF members through the PRIF's office in Sydney and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat to present at this specific update the report on this study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we do have some time for questions, possibly more than we thought we were going to. I have been instructed by several people that I have to tell you to, if you are going to contribute to the Q&A, please switch on the microphone to which you are, the one you're sitting closest to, because this session's being recorded. So we will I'll collect as many questions as we have, and then we can pass them around. I think there are a number of issues that I'm sure people will want to take this opportunity to develop, so please do indicate if you would like to ask a question. I would ask you to also introduce yourself before you ask a question. Yes, one over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Wawan from ADBI. Thank you very much for the presentation from all of you. I have a question or comment, especially for Christopher. I also got the data from Christopher, data for the survey in PNG as household survey, and I also try to use this data. I understand that Christopher have a good relation with PNG government, maybe, so I think I have a suggestion for the data, because looking at this survey data, because you also mentioned, Christopher, in your presentation that one of the weakness is about the data, and I saw the data of this survey is, for me, it's my personal opinion, is too ambitious, because the data is, the questionnaire itself is very complete, and I think in terms of the PNG economy is too complicated. So then I saw in the result that there are so many blank data. So my suggestion is that maybe we can reconstruct this survey data more simple, and then I don't know. I'm from Indonesia, and maybe PNG can learn from BPS Indonesia. In case of Indonesia, we have a series of this survey, and they have a simple, but I think it's more useful and can be used, because the data from PNG is very difficult to analyze, and so many blank, because I think too ambitious. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Matt?
Take it from
Yeah.
your mic died again.
Yeah, mine.
There we go. Apologies.
That's better,
All right.
I think.
So
No.
it is better.
Come and sit here.
Okay.
So I have a number of questions for Christopher, and some of them are related to the data as well, so I thought I'll ask them now. So one is in relation to the quality of the data. I sort of alluded to this in my presentation. As part of our research, we've spoken with various parts of the Department of Works, including its the branch that manages the Work Asset Management system, and they've told us that the coverage of non-national roads is very partial, but definitely not complete. So I'm wondering whether that was a problem or how you overcame it. A second question: it's wonderful to get data of this type actually developed and using that GIS approach. Will the resulting data set be made available publicly? Because that's always the issue in the Pacific, both with household income and expenditure survey data, as well as anything produced by governments or by donors. Often they're kept privately, and that really reduces their utility.
And then just a third question. I was unclear from your presentation as to what exactly the instrumental variable was that you used, so I was hoping you could elaborate.
Okay. No, you stay here, because you're probably going to have any other questions?
I'm Asunada. I'm the one from here, USP. This is an interesting session for me. I always have an interest in transport from a town planner's viewpoint. So when Matthew was discussing his paper on road maintenance and decentralization, my mind keeps on going back to Fiji's scenario. Perhaps it'll be interesting. I don't know whether anyone has done a study on it. Just to do a study on the shift of the administrative structure from local governments to the new road authority that we have as residents, citizens of this country. It is wonderful to have the beautiful roads now in some parts of Fiji. But then one notes that the government is opening up that stretch in Vanua level, the other main island, and other parts of Witi level. So it'll be interesting to see the Fiji scenario on it and how they've changed their governance structure to implement what we have now. Also, when the first speaker was discussing his paper, I was thinking aloud of the funding with the bullet train and all that. Perhaps it's something we can look at parallels in small island nations in the Pacific. Perhaps it's a challenge from our perspective, from small Pacific island nations, to look at parallels and see how we can encourage businesses along those routes. Opening up the stretch of the highway between Korovo, that small town, to Rakiraki, you see the changes now when you drive through of the vendors that sit there and the prices of agriculture goods that they sell. So it's increased, so they must be getting a lot of money, so the economic spillovers is quite good. And the other matter that I wanted to point out was the Setareki Macanawai's issue, his topic on including disabled. That's good, and Fiji has progressed a lot on that over the last 10 years, because I was in the Capital City Authority for a long time, and before joining the university. So that has progressed a lot, and of course there's still a lot more work to be done. But the inclusivity also has to include other disadvantaged groups, like the women with children when you're doing designs of ramps, those that can be temporarily disabled at any point. We take it for granted that we are okay, but then that can happen to anyone. So the elderly, so the designs and all that could perhaps look at that larger sector of society to include them as well. But there is certainly a lot of move on the disabled group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll maybe do them in reverse order. So we might start with the question about inclusivity, and that was also my question, whether the work that's being done by the Disability Forum and other disability groups can be a spearhead for other people, and I think we've just had enumerated the sorts of groups, and then we'll move on to Matthew. I'm sure he's desperate to say something about the Fiji Roads Authority, and finally, Christopher, you can defend your data.
Thank you, Senata. I think I may remember meeting you at the Suva City Council years ago. So thank you for the question, and I think it's when individuals like yourself and others in this room, because many a time that group, this group that we are talking about, many a time are not at the table where decisions are made and discussions are taking place around ensuring no one's left behind. I think the onus is on partners to ensure that they are including consciously all the time the voice, the participation of the often referred to the marginalized groups, those with disabilities, the elderly, women, children, those out in the rural areas, the indigenous community, all of them, and how we factor them into something that is targeting the society generally and ensuring that that target is kept in focus. And that is the benefit is really benefiting everyone. And I think this work that led by this report, I think it's a step in the right direction. A report that I think is worth reading and can be drawn on to leverage development in the right direction around accessibility and infrastructure. And you're right, Fiji certainly doing great in this area. There's a bill currently in Parliament, the disability bill. And also there's a policy, and there's recently the budget announcements around initiatives to support inclusion of persons with disabilities in the country. I think others are also doing well in other countries, but I think in so far as infrastructure, many times it's easy to forget that persons with disabilities to want to use the road, want to use a footpath, want to go shopping, want to go in the bus. A bus here in Fiji and other countries of the Pacific is not a very good option for those in wheelchairs. Either you lift it up or you crawl up yourself. It can be, it doesn't look good. I mean, not good for the soul, for anybody. So there's currently work on that, and hopefully this report will provide a trigger for greater interest and appetite for this work in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It is interesting that just as countries like PNG, Solomon Islands, move to decentralise their service delivery, we're seeing almost the opposite happen in Fiji, at least in relation to road management. I don't know the activities of the Fiji Road Authority well enough to really give a good answer in respect to the quality of their work. I understand that they were invited to speak as part of this session, and it's unfortunate that they declined to be here, because I do think that accountability is very important with these road management institutions that are autonomous from government, and given the very large budgetary resources that are being allocated to the FRA, I think it's around 600 million per year. Really, that accountability should be front and centre. And they do have a good website with annual reports and so forth, but I think outreach could be improved. It's also interesting to note that, just anecdotally, I understand the FRA's work has been fairly good, and people are seeing improvements in the road network, although you'd expect to see that given the amount of resources that is being allocated there. That's a very different experience to that of Papua New Guinea, when it established a road fund which had similar objectives, and I think really the difference is simply because the government has been very much behind the FRA in Fiji, whereas it was not really behind the National Roads Authority in PNG.
Okay, very quickly, because it's getting close to 10, I hope we can go a little over. So thanks very much for the questions. I've had two of the people who actually did the bulk of the work, so I'm just sort of the guy who manages things, but and help out a bit. But I have two of my collaborators from Amsterdam. It's close to midnight there. They've been waiting, so I'll hand over the questions on the instrumental variables and the data to them, and then maybe offer some responses if I have anything to add to what they say. So let me introduce Martin Wiegand and Menno Prabhan from Amsterdam. Can you guys say hello?
Hello. Hi, it's Menno. This is Martin. You hear?
Yes, we hear you fine. So do you want to take? We're handling the questions in reverse order. So how about Matthew's question about the instrument in the estimates?
Right. So, well, first of all, I think the emphasis on our approach is that we try to have heterogeneity in a sort of additive form, and use a fixed effects approach where we can, and sort of try with these moonlight and Chamberlain approaches to get a sort of within estimated to sort of tackle heterogeneity. to the replication of this earlier study by Gibson and Brazil. So that particular study uses an instrument which is basically the year when first the highway penetrated a particular district of PNG, right? So this was used as an instrument in that earlier paper, and when we replicate this earlier paper, we use that as well. I think we didn't put too much emphasis on that in this presentation because it turned out to be quite weak, and we like the fixed text approach much better. Does that?
Yes, thanks. And then any comments from you about the status of the data, both the HICE as well as the road asset management system data?
Right. What was it? I didn't really catch the point about the HICE.
I'll take that. I'll take the HICE question then. Just on the RAMs then, please.
Well, we realized that it's when we were in PNG, we received various files from various institutions, and we happen to have a separate data file on provincial roads, which dates around the year 2000, and that supposedly was collected by DFW, not part of the rounds, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Menno?
Well, I think what was also important that when we tried to link the 2 years of data, and we had a much finer network for the 2010 data. And so, and at the same time, we heard that there was not much new road construction that had happened. And so that we could safely assume that there were, the network of roads was the same, but most of the difference would be in the quality. Mm-hmm. So we did do some interpolation there that we said if we couldn't find the roads in the earlier data, we just copied it from the later data, which basically means that the changes that we observed in the data are an underestimate of the real changes that have occurred, right? Because in some case where we didn't know the change, we just assumed it stayed the same.
Okay, then if nothing else, I'll just add, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, so it does mean that any of the changes in the excess are changes in the road quality, not the construction of a new road. And that's definitely a biased estimate. There probably were some new roads there. And definitely a question I have for Matthew a bit is, he gave a number for the national provincial roads and then the local roads. And the number that is showing up in your estimates is actually in between the two. So it's interesting. I just had a meeting with the National Roads Authority and the Department of Works last week when I was in Moresby, and definitely there right now, even the quality of the 2010 data is a little bit questionable because it was very qualitatively assessed, so that poor, good, fair, good wasn't very consistently measured. Now, the Department of Works has a major undertaking, again, with international development partner assistance to improve that database. And this is another very important thing for PNG government and other governments is that tracing expenditures into actual outcomes on the road. So this is actually a huge challenge around PNG. And actually Department of Works and the efforts they've done might be a model for the rest of the government in terms of improving the accountability of public expenditure. So this is important stuff. Finally, if nothing else from Martin or Menno, on the PNG HICE, I agree with you completely. It is a very complex model. It's actually a different hat I wear in terms of representing ADB on different, the Pacific, what is it called? The collection of, the name is escaping me. There's a group of NSOs that meet, the Pacific Statistics Steering Committee. And SPC has very much been running that, and there has been widespread criticism that the HICE form that they've designed is essentially a Cadillac HICE. It's a very high level, very labor intensive HICE, and there's definitely moves now, ADB working with World Bank as well as SPC to come up with a much simpler form, because I think most people would agree with you. that we need to collect heists, but they probably shouldn't be trying for the level of effort that they went through, and shouldn't be asking as many questions as they are, household diaries and things like that. So it's a big enterprise because in the Pacific it's especially a challenge because there's just not a lot of statistics resources. So when you undertake an important collection like the heist, you don't want it to cost so much money and take so many years. And definitely the 2009 PNG did both. Cost a great deal of money, and has taken a very long time to be officially released.
Yeah, I think that's a session in itself about statistics.
Next year, maybe.
Yeah, next year in Fiji. We have gone over, but I am prepared to contemplate one final question. Yeah, Matt. You have to introduce yourself, even though I just said your name.
Yeah, I'm Matt. I'm from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian Government, working in Vanuatu. I've got a question from Matt Dornan, a very quick one. So you identified two, I guess, problems with the PNG approach to decentralisation in roads. One is the funding model, the use of constituency funds, and the second one is the capacity of the provincial governments. I guess my question is, to what extent do you think that capacity is a binding constraint? So if you, let's say, you go back and you had a different model for distributing those funds through the budget, it was more timely, more predictable, do you think the outcome would have been substantially different, given the capacity issues at the provincial level?
Okay, just checking. No, I think that's it, Matt. It's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. Good question. Yeah, I think the outcome would have been different. I mean, the capacity does vary considerably between the different provinces. So, excuse me. So in the Gulf was the province which quite clearly had the least capacity. It's also a very small province, so perhaps there the difference wouldn't have been quite so large. But certainly with some of the provinces with greater capacity, Eastern Highlands, Milne Bay, I think the technical skills are there, but they're just not being used. So you have engineers sitting in the provincial works units who are really an underutilised resource. They're not being used for the design or the costing or the spending of those constituency development fund. And often they're intentionally sidelined because there are kickbacks and so forth. So the political leaders have an interest in not getting real costings for the roads. So I do think that there are resources there that are just being underutilised under the current system.
Okay, I think we will bring it to a close there so that everybody can have a cup of coffee. Christopher's going to teach me how to use his fancy presentation style. But before that, please join me in thanking all members of our panel for the session.
So the figures I had were 30,000 total.